Cattle ship. Eternal garden. How could this happen? How did mere feed manage to strike at them so brazenly? Their assault was unexpected at every conceivable level, but there was no doubt that the detestable feed that called themselves humans had tricked them. The evidence was now displayed across several debris fields that had been the ships of its brethren. "High Marshal, we're receiving a message from the Delight in Sunrise and the Unchallenged Incubator. They ask if they should turn and face the damaged black vessel?" asked the nearest communication officer. High Marshal Diffit turned its full attention to the officer, and its petals quickly displayed its answer. "They'll continue to engage the smaller vessels. The humans of that dark vessel will try to board us. Have our engineers tended to our damaged electronics?" "Our engineers are doing what they can, but the damage we sustained during their initial assault has proven extensive. We are running on emergency power and secondary batteries. If they decide to strike us down, there is nothing we can do to stop them." To any other filthy animal, the display of their colored petals would transmit nothing. Lower life forms were simple creatures like that, devoid of higher functions of intellect and interpretation. Yet another point that made the Drazens superior was that they could transmit complex emotional messages through slightly different variations of the colors they could conjure and the barely perceptible movements of their petals. But to Diffit, the fear, anger, and trepidation were more than apparent in the officer's reply. "They won't. They want to capture the Eternal Garden for their own selfish and nefarious purposes. They will have us all killed before that," it replied, and paused for a moment, gathering its thoughts. "How many defenders, hunters, and skinners do we have on board?" "No more than 10,000, High Marshal," replied the officer. "Do we have the power to run our automated defenses?" "We do, High Marshal." Diffit shuffled where it stood, unwilling to take its pod of command during such a situation that required his undivided attention. Looking around the chamber, illuminated by a pleasant red light, it saw the rest of its kin working on their tasks. The fury in its hearts was hard to contain and only allowed itself to flail its vines around slowly, eager to carve the meat of the insolent feed who had dared attack and kill so many Drazan already. Its duty was to its siblings first. Rage could wait. "How are things progressing on the planet? Has the Lord Harrower managed to disengage the filthy apes?" Diffit asked. "A moment, High Marshal," the officer replied, turning to its circular panel and deftly using its surprisingly dexterous manipulators to tap quick commands. A few seconds later, it turned to Diffit, its colors showcasing grimace and fury. "High Marshal, the Lord Harrower is still unable to disengage any of its forces. The feed is pressing on all fronts and several pods have been overrun. Lord Harrower Cartagolgo has managed to establish itself in 3 major route holds, but access to the void-capable shuttles and transports is impossible." Diffit wanted to lash out in anger. Ever since the destruction of the ondulating vine, Lord Harrower Cartagolgo, its dearest friend and superior, attempted to pull back and send as many defenders and hunters it could spare. But the damn humans, somehow sensing the retreat of such units and a de-escalation of the ongoing harvest, instead of running to hide like the stinking, filthy, delicious animals they were, like so many others had in a futile attempt to prevent them from being used by their betters. They pressed the attack on all fronts, pinning down Cartagolgo's troops and preventing the return of their veteran and trained personnel to the Eternal Garden. Diffit lamented at that moment the decision it made to transfer most of the troops at its disposal so the harvest and subjugation of the planet could be completed as fast as possible. That had left their fleet without the numbers to spare and send boarding actions against that accursed dark vessel. Then again, after seeing it in action, it doubted many, if any, boarding pods would have made it. "Prepare kill zones and set traps. Take battle stations. We must prepare for anything the feed may send upon us," Diffit commanded. "Order the caretakers to seal the nurseries. Dispatch our remaining skinners and defenders to the cattle farms. Take the young feed. Use them as shields. Humans are cruel to each other, but hold care for their delectable spawn." "Orders dispatched, High Marshal," replied the officer. Suddenly, the quick shuffling of clawed paws caught their attention. Diffiti turned to see a kin wearing an engineering uniform. It was clearly agitated as its vines flailed wildly and its manipulators gripped each other nervously. "High Marshal! Remain calm, sibling," "What is it that you wish to communicate?" Diffit asked, portraying a restraint it had not. "That ship," the engineer replied, its pedals vibrating fearfully. "The Great Bloom, before it was destroyed, sent an encoded transmission. It recognized the ship. It is the same ship that stopped the assault of High Marshal Kuitar set upon the system the humans called Jintrax." Diffit was unable to keep its vines from flaring, lashing out for several seconds as it processed the information. Of course it knew of Jintrax and the monstrous ship that foiled Kuitar's mission, in turn exposing the treachery of the human rebels. That same ship had come to hunt them down? Did the humans see them as prey? Mere feed? Pathetic. Preposterous. Humans were animals. They were all animals, some smarter than others, but animals at the end of the day. They were not predators, only pretenders and fakes, never like the glorious Drazan. It refused to believe that a so-called apient species that wantonly killed each other at every chance it got for petty reasons could do something so predatory. "Unleash our remaining craft," Diffit ordered, partly in desperation and partly in anger. "We have no more qualified pilots, High Marshal. The remaining ones are untrained and untested," the officer replied. Diffit's tendrils went rigid and its manipulators turned to fists, shaking slightly. The officer was right. Sending untrained pilots would only get them killed for nothing. And after seeing the odd and, it had to admit, terrifying tactics and strategies deployed by the humans in their dark vessel, it wasn't confident about their chances of success. It could hardly believe when the surviving pilots of the patrol strike force returned. Who could believe such an obvious fabrication? Their retelling of how a smaller force undid them could not be anything more than blustering lies. But data and recordings did not lie. Despite their preparations and standing ready to fight, the surprise strike from the dark vessel threw the fleet into chaos for several moments, more than enough time for their enemy to puncture several of their ships with an opening barrage. They had done everything in their power to take it down, but the dark vessel never hesitated. It had been a brutal departure from the usual strategies and movements made by the Principality feed that none could adapt quickly enough to counter them effectively. Diffit could take solace in that its siblings had damaged the powerful dark vessel significantly, but nothing more than that. It wasn't crippled, but its capabilities were reduced with how much heat it had generated. Even if it ran away now, it wouldn't now that its allies had arrived. Its mysterious means of obscuring its presence was tarnished. "High Marshal, I'm detecting a feed shuttle approaching our main hangar bay," the officer exclaimed. "Have defenders ready to meet the intruders," Diffit ordered. "Heavy weapons are allowed. It is likely they sent competent fighters." "Maybe the shuttle has explosives?" offered the engineer. "They wouldn't use a shuttle when they could easily strike us with a torpedo or tear into us with railgun strikes." "No, my kin. They are trying to board us. To send a small force only means that they are sending their best. Gazer, I want footage of the hangar now." At its command, a holoscreen appeared in front of it displaying his requested area. It saw 100 defenders and several dozen trainees fully suited, carrying heavy laser and short-range plasma weapons set upon defensive positions. Before more defenders could arrive, however, the shuttle entered the hangar unleashing a barrage of kinetic rounds from previously concealed turret compartments. The defenders and the trainees opened fire, flaring the shields of the shuttle with only a few plasma bolts punching through, melting armor and wreaking havoc with the internal electronics. Many kin were butchered by the two turrets until they stopped firing. Then, suddenly, a section of the shuttle exploded, and 12 figures emerged with the use of jetpacks. The armored humans, lowly feed that they were, would be slaughtered within moments. Except, it didn't happen. Some shots landed on them, flaring their personal shields, but almost faster than its eyes could follow, they were upon its siblings. The expected slaughter happened, but unleashed upon Drazan, not feed. It was anti-natural to see nearly 300 siblings cut down with terrifying ease, and not a single human had fallen. Sparing a second amongst each other, Diffit watched with horror how they split into groups of 3 and then rushed out in different directions. "Give me visuals on all of them!" it ordered, and the holoscreen widened, splitting itself into several different video feeds. 2 groups were running down corridors, gutting and killing any kin that dared confront them. It didn't matter if they were defenders, caretakers, or simple trainees. They slaughtered them all without mercy, and often before the kin could return fire. They used pistols, rifles, and terrible energy swords with the same deadly efficiency. On the bridge watched in horror how mere juvenile kin, brave ones who refused to leave their stations for the sanctuary deeper within the ship, were torn to shreds mercilessly, their remains adorning the floors without care. "Woo! Why aren't the automated defenses working?" the engineer cried, flailing widely as it did. "They have not reached them yet. What is the feed doing, officer?" Diffit asked, his attention stolen back to the hangar where 6 more of those deadly figures emerged bearing similar weaponry. Behind them, though, a figure wearing red armor from top to bottom stepped out. Just seeing this feed, this human thing through the camera, sent a tremor of pure fear up its stalk and caused its hearts to skip several beats one after the other. "Hi, Marshal, the feed! They are accessing a console! They're invading our networks!" The officer replied in a panic, tapping on its panel for several seconds before frustratingly punching it several times. "Viruses are flooding our servers. Ghost AIs are hijacking and rewriting our command protocols, blocking access to several ship systems. They're destroying our assistant AIs one by one in mere seconds. Automated defenses have been deactivated. Trigger motion traps and automated traps have been deactivated. Security cameras are functional. Life support is being cut off from all living quarters. Entire decks and bulkheads are being sealed off. We've managed to isolate the bridge and the grazing grounds. That shouldn't be possible. Humans don't know our protocols, our systems," Diffit replied. Anger replaced fear and confusion turned into indignation. "Order our forces to avoid engaging the human feed. Set perimeters around the nurseries and the cattle pens. Protocol rotting tomb is in effect. Engineer, can we overload our reactors?" "We can't. The humans have disabled it," the engineer replied in a panic. High Marshal Diffit was backed into a wall. There was nothing more that it could do, and it knew it. The humans had crippled them, and they were set on a desperate defense of their home and promise of the future, a future that now looked bleak and unreachable. As High Marshal, it could order every kin except for the caretakers to face the invaders. But that would just mean it'd sacrifice them for mere seconds of delay before they reached the more populated areas. For now, its greatest aim was to rescue siblings trapped on isolated decks with hampered life support. "Send engineers and defenders as their vanguard with breaching equipment. Liberate as much of our kin as possible," Diffit commanded, desperately struggling to keep any semblance of confidence and security, however fake it was. "High Marshal, they're avoiding targeting the video and recording systems on purpose," the officer said, veins trembling erratically. "Monsters!" While Drazan lacked vocal cords, the high-pitched hiss that escaped its mouth as its tongue lashed out was charged with all the hatred it could muster. "They want us to watch our demise. Seal the bridge and everyone prepare. They'll make their way here eventually. Let us offer prayers to Drazkalak and eradicate these human beasts from our home." Diffit watched as every kin was quick to take up arms and suit up, ready to give their lives if need be for the survival and supremacy of all Drazan. With that said, it turned back to the holoscreen to see the progress of the humans. To its surprise, they had halted their reckless advance and were now securing the terrain already gained. The hangar and 4 entire decks were now theirs. Virtually nothing on a ship the size of the Eternal Garden, but the speed and ruthlessness in which they had taken it was to be feared. For what felt like an eternity, Diffit could only watch as the armored humans, led by that terrifying Red One, waited for something. "High Marshal, we've lost all communications with the Lord Harrower and the rest of our kin. Sensors also detect 6 shuttles incoming. Another group of 4 is following behind," the officer announced. Diffit didn't reply. It could only watch with impotency as 6 additional shuttles landed on their hangar, sullying it with their filthy human boots. Scores of humans discharged the shuttles, and the difference between the new arrivals and the first wave of attackers was more than evident. Some wore quality armor and weapons, and most were dressed in inferior but sustainable equipment, mass-produced and functional, but nothing impressive. The shuttles departed, and a minute later the 4 additional shuttles landed, discharging a more ramshackle group of humans equipped with varying grades of quality. The High Marshal watched carefully, seeing them form into groups and receiving orders before they broke off, and the incursion into the Eternal Garden began. Which zone will be reached first? It asked. That group, it began, highlighting the party of 5 humans led by the red-armored one, will reach the cattle pens if they continue on their way. High Marshal, they move as if they know where they are going. I fear they have stolen the Eternal Garden's schematics and layout. Obviously, Diffit replied bitterly, not against its sibling, but directed at the human feed. Inform our siblings that the humans are coming. Ready the cattle shields. On the screen, the perspective changed to show large areas dotted with pens where cattle could be held, sapient and not. Defenders and skinners were coordinating the defensive preparations, stacking metallic crates and other objects to create barricades, forming a kill zone that lined up with the main entrance. Juvenile cattle, children if it remembered correctly, were being taken out from their pens. Some protested or cried, others obeyed obediently. The loss of precious future breeding cattle would be tragic, but feed was feed, and if feed could buy them an advantage over the lowly humans, then it didn't matter. Once the defenses were set as best they could, with kin holding the children in front of them as shields, while their own weapons were aimed and ready, the group led by the red-armored human was less than 30 seconds away. On the screen, Diffit saw the red-armored human arm itself with a handgun in one hand and a dull-looking sword in the other. Before it could process what was happening, a glow of green energy surrounded the sword, and the human began to distort right in front of its eyes. Then, it happened. In a rush of speed that surprised everyone watching it, the red-armored human erupted past the entrance, sprinting at a speed that shouldn't have been possible. The first line of defenders opened fire with laser, heavy laser, and plasma rifles, but the human weaved and moved so fast and so erratically that nearly every shot failed to hit its intended mark. Almost too fast for its eyes to follow, the red-armored human closed the distance, and with a swing of its sword, 3 defenders alongside their shields were cut down as if they were made out of paper. Diffit watched in horror as the human jumped and moved with unmatched agility, cutting down kin after kin with laughable ease. It fired its gun several times, each time claiming the life of yet another kin. The momentum and the speed it carried from its earlier run proved to be nothing more than another tool it could use to deliver death upon innocent Drazan. 2 skinners confronted the human, their vines already flailing, ready to pierce, gut, and tear the human apart. The human answered the challenge by confronting them at the same time the other 4 armored humans reached the defensive line, swords ignited and proceeding to butcher kin and their shields mercilessly. The red-armored human easily dodged the Skinner's attacks, and the battle, if it could be called that, lasted for no more than 5 seconds before the human bisected one of the Skinners with a swift slash while punching the other, tearing its body in half from the force of the impact at the same time. The human stopped for a moment, reached out with its right arm to the side, and caught the handgun that it had at some point launched into the air. Diffit could only watch in horror as the rest of the kin there were slaughtered in mere seconds by the 5 humans. Most of the shields had also perished, but the humans paid them no mind nor care. They simply left them there as they proceeded to continue on their way. In less than a minute, 200 kin had lost their lives to 5 measly humans, although Diffit had to admit they were clearly no ordinary humans. Royal Marines, it finally said. There were only reports and distant rumors from other raiding parties in the past mentioning incredibly skilled and dangerous humans that far surpassed any other fighting feed. It had never considered such reports to be more than exaggerations, but now that it was seeing it with its own eyes, the reality of their situation shook it to the core. The other groups of humans moved swiftly, spearheaded by the armored ones that couldn't be anything but Royal Marines. Each time they entered an area, the Royal Marines would cause mayhem and panic, allowing the other humans following behind them to finish off the survivors. This went on for nearly half an hour, with more and more ground gained and subjugated by the damn humans. When they reached the large grazing grounds at the center of the Eternal Garden, they all halted. The vast farming lands, complete with floral and fungal forests, running water, and a controlled climate filled with docile, tamed, non-sapient cattle, was something they were clearly not expecting to find. Their momentary moment of doubt ended quickly as the Royal Marines reacted first, when several of those accursed invaders suddenly dropped to the ground, either dead or heavily wounded, taken down by the precise shots of hunters. The humans spread out, with the ones wearing the better equipment at the center of formations, while the rest protected them. Their weaker shields often proved to be easily pierced by a single plasma or focused laser shot. From concealed positions, defenders and skinners jumped out, lashing out against the invaders. The regular humans, as expected, hesitated to harm the living shields carried by proud Drazen warriors. Many more fell due to that moment's hesitation, but that only spurred them to fight back, uncaring of harming the living meat shields. Diffit cursed internally when kin after kin were brought down. Some claimed the life of a human or two, but they were badly outnumbered everywhere and thoroughly outmatched at every turn the Royal Marines were present. Frustratingly, the ramshackle group was performing better than the other humans, taking only scant casualties while focusing fire on a single objective in smaller groups at a time. Unlike their better-equipped counterparts, they didn't hesitate to sacrifice the shields if it meant killing one more of its siblings. "Animals! They are perverted animals," Diffit said as the battle continued. "High Marshal, the Red One," the officer warned, panic clear in its shifting colors. Diffit's attention focused on the red-armored human. It had stopped at an intersection along the other four. While it couldn't know what they were discussing, it soon became apparent as the 4 Royal Marines split into 2 groups, running to each side of the intersection to spread out their slaughter. Meanwhile, the red-armored human continued on forward, heading directly to the bridge. "Form up! Form up!" Diffit commanded, quickly checking its weapons. Every kin followed suit, every weapon pointed at the blast door, keeping the bridge isolated. 2 heavy security turrets were manually overridden and operated by 2 defenders. The holoscreen suddenly died a second alter. "Report! I don't know. The security cameras died at the same time all over the Eternal Garden," the officer answered, agitated. Had they planned this? Had they allowed them to witness the invasion of their home just to blind them at the end? Just how cruel could these unfeeling animals be? Those questions crossed Diffit's mind moments before something powerful hit the blast door. Another hit followed, and then another and another, each time making most of them flinch and take a step back in pure fear. Then it stopped, and silence reigned with only the shuffling noises of clawed paws breaking through every now and again. Without warning, the doors suddenly opened, just enough to allow a young human to pass through. No order was needed to be given. Every weapon, from vine-mounted lasers to plasma rifles and the defense turrets, unleashed their fury on the tight entryway. Scorch marks were formed upon the floor and the doors. Plasma shots sometimes missed, hitting instead a console or another piece of equipment that destroyed it, often with explosive consequences and initiating a fire that quickly spread. The concentrated barrage of laser and plasma was so intense that the floor near the entrance started to glow brightly and melt, but only leaving brief, bright marks on the reinforced blast doors. Through the continuous fire, however, the body, or rather, what remained of it, of a kin, flew past the suppressing screen. Everyone stopped firing, long enough for them to see in horror the wriggling but still alive kin bereft of its vines, eye stalk, legs, and 3 arms. The pain it was going through had to be unimaginable, and rage filled Diffit's hearts. But too late it realized their mistake. It had been a mere moment of hesitation, but that was all the red-armored human needed. In an agile move, it entered the bridge. Then, before any could resume shooting at the red monster, it leaped forth gracefully, sword ignited on its left hand while the right shot 3 times, ending the lives of 3 siblings. "Open fire!" Diffit ordered, any semblance of self-control and calm erased from its mind. The human landed, killing 2 more kin with the swing of its sword, only to then move incredibly fast to its right, cutting through one of the turrets. It leaped back a dozen meters a second before the turret exploded, killing every sibling near it. The human landed on an engineer a moment later, crushing it instantly. Its shields flared when a plasma bolt hit it, but in return, the glow around the sword ended, and it tossed it at the kin responsible for the attack. The sword pierced straight through its head, impaling another kin in the process to a console. The human then impossibly began to jump, weave, and run with exceptional mobility, crouching so close to the ground that it could fuse with it or bending its body in ways Biffet had never seen another human move before. A defender charged forth, but the human spun around, jumped above it, and then delivered a kick as it descended that turned the 2.5 meters tall Drazen into a bloody mess of blood, organs, and shattered limbs. 6 more shots followed, and 4 kin died mercifully quickly. The human retrieved the sword, igniting it again before launching itself at the other turret, but instead of cutting it like the previous one, it opted to simply kill the defender operating it before lunging to its left, grabbing the kin's eye stalk, shattering the reinforced protective glass as if it wasn't even there and crushing the stalk in a tight grip. It then tossed the kin around with such strength and speed that the engineer that was tackled by the body was smeared on its console, killing them both. In a desperate move, the officer attacked with all vines, its shifting colors showing just how terrified it was. The human didn't bother to dodge its attacks, for only 3 landed hitting its armor without showing any effect, before a swift, powerful kick ripped the officer into 3 separate pieces, smearing its console in the process. "Not feed," Diffit said, activating its translator as it stood in front of the red-armored human looking at him firmly through the glowing green visor it was using. Behind it, the fires danced violently, as if trying to render tribute and praise upon the one who had caused such slaughter. It was then and only then that Diffit realized that it was the only one left alive. "Not feed. You, human. You are a demon." Wordlessly, the red-armored demon raised its sword. The strike was so fast that Diffit didn't register it until a short-lived flash of pain coursed through its body. It felt itself falling to the right and to the left at the same time, and before it could hit the ground, darkness overtook it. Cynthia Winfield deactivated her sword and holstered her gun. Sheathing her sword, she opened a link with Redford. "This is Cynthia Winfield, Commander Redford. The cattle ship has been captured. Our forces are dealing with the remaining stragglers." "Understood. Good hunting, Cynthia," Redford replied, killing the link. Cynthia allowed herself to sigh and roll her left shoulder before looking around at the carnage with nothing but apathy. "Disgusting creatures," she said with poison coating each word. A sudden thought struck her and she knelt down, picking up one of the twitching, claw-tipped vines of the Drazen. She then tore it away, examining it for a few seconds before repeating the process a few times until she had 24, storing them in one of her utility pouches. Making her way to the main console, wires came out of her bracers, connecting with the ship more directly. "Let's see what secrets are you hiding,"